Welcome to the Mission Matters. The Mission Matters is a partnership between 1615 and Missionexis, who have a shared passion to mobilize God's people to be a part of His mission. The Mission Matters is hosted by Matthew Ellison, president of 1615, and Ted Esler, president of Missionexis. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And now, here are your hosts, Matthew Ellison and Ted Esler.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Matthew Ellison, and as always, I am joined by my good friend and co-host, Ted Esler. Ted, it's great to see you again.
Good to see you, Matthew. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Listen, I'm very excited about today's guest, but before we interview him and get this podcast started, we always start off with a softball question. And I'll answer it myself. I'll kick it over to you, and then you can kick it over to our guest. But what is your favorite missions or missionary quote? Now, I've been compiling a list of quotes for some years now. I've got this growing document on my desktop of great inspirational missionary quotes. And lo and behold, Marv Newell publishes a book. I think he edits a book a few years ago called Attempt Great Things or Expect Great Things. What's the name, Ted?
Yeah, it's Attempt Great Things.
Okay, Marv, if you're listening, you owe us lunch. We're giving a plug for your book there. It's really good. But before that book came out, I was curating this list of great missionary quotes. And I think the first one that struck me probably 25 years ago plus was from Hudson Taylor. Unless there's an element of risk in our exploits for God, there is no need for faith. And that has always just spoken to my heart, inspired me. If we can pull it off with our own ingenuity, with our intellect, with our resources, we have no occasion to trust God. And so that's always pushed me to attempt things that I can't do on my own. And of course, when you do that, that's when you see God move. So that's my favorite missionary quote.
Well, you kind of stole my thunder because I was going to mention Marv's book. And the title of the book is actually also my favorite quote. And, in my book, The Innovation Crisis, I use William Carey as kind of the rubric to think about innovation through. And his quote, expect great things, attempt great things. Now, that quote's a little controversial because when we commonly use it, we add from God. But in the original quote, he actually didn't say that. That was the context inferred in the sermon. But expect great things from God, attempt great things from God would be my favorite quote. And we have on the podcast today, missions pastor. You're going to hear all about him and his church. His name is Justin Mack. But let's start with your favorite quote, Justin.
Yeah, I think, Ted, you sent me that book maybe to just keep talking about that amazing book of quotes there. But yeah, it's just full. I remember as a kid reading about Jim Elliot and his famous classic missions quote, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose," is probably one of my favorite quotes. Just his life, his example, what he was willing to do. And I as soon as you asked the question, there was three that came to my mind. So two bonus ones is William Borden, missionary who gave up the fortune to go and try to reach the Mohammedans in China, stopped in Cairo, Egypt, and was buried there. In the back of his journal, wrote "No reserves, no retreats, no regrets" is also at the top of the list. But one maybe not as well known, Elizabeth Grant, her and her husband started Project Rescue, says that missions is not a department of a church, but it's a fight against hell. And that to me is just a pretty poignant thought that this isn't just a little department. This isn't just this is a mission that God has us on, and it is a fight. So those are three that jump out, but that book is just full of amazing quotes. You could just spend all day talking about that.
Well, Justin, I'm going to tell you, if you hang out with Matthew much, he'll say things and I've written a few quotes of his down through time. And sometime, Matthew, I should share that little list with you because you've got your own inspirational quotes that even some of the quotes in the book, When Everything is Missions, there's some good quotes in there as well. So,
oh, thanks, Ted.
Yeah. Well, Justin, we always start out by having the guests introduce themselves. And so tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks. This is just an honor. First of all, let me just say to get to be on a podcast with two legends like yourself. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah, I serve as a missions pastor at River Valley Church up in Minnesota. We're a multi-site church. We have 8, 9 campuses, about to open up another one. And I'm married. I have 3 little kids, 10-year-old girl, 8-year-old boy, and then a 2-year-old little girl. Our 2-year-olds are by far our spiciest. Love, love, love traveling, seeing the world, come alongside missionaries, free time hobbies. Grew up in Arizona, loved playing tennis. Actually wanted to be a professional tennis player, but didn't have the talent, the skill to be that. So, but still love playing in leagues and stuff. Love doing triathlons, anything active outside, hiking. Yeah, it's just anything outside. I love doing that. But yeah, been at the church for 15 years. Just an honor to get to be a part of such an incredible church whose heart is global. And yeah.
Justin, I've only known you a few months. Ted introduced us, and basically Ted said, you have to meet Justin Mack. This guy has incredible passion for the nations. And he said, I think in terms of what God is accomplishing to reach the nations through a church, this church is at the top of the list. So immediately after I spent time with you, I could sense you were all in. You mentioned that quote, no reserves. After my first meeting with you, I was just inspired. I was energized after the phone call, I must tell you. And I know your heart. Thanks be to God. I'm not trying to boast in you. I'm boasting in the work of God in you.
Yeah.
Anyway, how did you end up on Mission with God? I mean, you're all in. So what happened?
Yeah, definitely. It's not a gig. It's not a job. It's not a hobby. It's our heart. My wife and I, our family. I grew up in an amazing Christian home. My parents pastored all my life, retired a few years ago, but some of my fondest childhood memories was sitting at the kitchen table. I was at the kids' table, they were at the adult table, but listening to them talk to missionary guests that had come to my parents' church, and just listening to their stories. I was intrigued. I wanted to know more. Just something sparked in my heart. And then actually my first missions trip when I was 16 years old, I went to Lima, Iquitos, Peru. I went because some friends were going. I thought it was going to be fun, but I had no idea how impactful and how much of a trajectory my life would be on from those experiences and those eye-opening, heart-changing experiences. And I didn't even know how impactful it was, to be honest, at the time. But when I look back at my life, it changed. My grandparents made it possible. They were farmers in South Dakota that sacrificed in ways I didn't even realize, so that I could go and experience God's heart for the world. And it just continued to grow. After Bible college, I actually started to go to law school to study law, maybe as a tool for missions. And I was volunteering at a missions organization. And I actually left law school and went full-time at this missions organization. And one of the very first trips that I helped organize was for this small little church of a couple hundred people called River Valley Church. It's our home church now. But at the time, it was just a couple hundred people. And I met our lead pastor, Rob Ketterling, and his passion for the world, the vision that he had. Although it was small at the time, you could tell it just burned in his heart. And I was connected right away. And 5 years later, transitioned over to River Valley. And it's just been a wild ride, beyond anything we could have ever imagined. And what the Lord is doing through a local church is it's incredible. So the story.
I don't want to, inappropriately point to numbers as the best and greatest evaluation, but I think your church has some pretty impressive mission numbers. And it's, from my perspective, maybe the most involved missions church in the US. Maybe it's at least in the top 5 or 10, I'd say. So tell us a little bit about the kind of the scale, the size and scope of what you do in global missions at River Valley.
Yeah,
I know you don't want to go into all this, but I'm going to force it out of you.
No, that's all right. Yeah, no, numbers aren't the indicator of everything, but it maybe kind of paints a little bit of the scope or the picture. But let me start by saying our lead pastor is a unicorn in the best sense of his passion for global missions is unparalleled. And there's some amazing pastors out there, but I just think that our pastor, on Easter Sunday, he'll be talking about raising up and sending out missionaries to the unreached, like Easter Sunday. Like you don't hear that from many pastors, let alone a mega church pastor. But so I have to give credit where credit is due. And I remember we were meeting with a marketing director a number of years ago at a little coffee shop. And this guy had asked our lead pastor, he says, I get it, as a lead pastor, you have to be passionate about everything. You have to be passionate about men's ministry, women's ministry, worship, kids, youth. You have to care about it all kind of diplomatically. He goes, but I'm trying to understand how passionate you are as the leader of this church to in the area of missions, the Great Commission. And he is not typically one lost for words, but he just kind of stammered for a second and then put his fist on the table and said, no, our heart is global. Like you rip out our heart and you're going to see it beat for the nations. And then this marketer said, that's it. He goes, what's it? He goes, that's your tagline, River Valley Church, our heart is global. And it's true. We support nearly about 1,000 missionaries every single month. It ends up being millions and millions of dollars in monthly support for missionaries. Above and beyond that, we have a thing called Kingdom Builders, where we look to be generous above and beyond the tithe. So we tithe on the tithe towards long-term missionaries. And this year, our goal is to raise $7.5 million above and beyond the tithe. That'd be above and beyond the monthly support of missionaries. A number of years ago, we had a moment actually around the graveside of William Borden, the gentleman I gave the quote of no reserves, no retreats, no regrets, and had just a prayer moment where we felt like the Lord say, raise up 500 missionaries. This is one that gave up his life. Would you raise up others that will give their life for the sake of the gospel? And so we're not there yet, but we raised up 160 is where we're at right now. And we define that as at least 1 year overseas, praying about a lifetime. And we're not a sending agency. We want to partner with the best agencies. So we want to support them, encourage them, connect them with sending agencies to go, and then we'll come alongside of them in every way we can. Another just anecdotal type example of our heart. A number of years ago, our elders and Pastor Rob decided that we were going to try to send every single junior and senior in high school on a missions trip for free. So the adults would raise the money and send them. And the thought behind that was that we don't just want kids to know that they can raise $2,000. We want kids to know that there's a generation that believes in them and God has a plan, a global plan for their life. And that if they can catch a vision of it and get a heart for it, they'll realize that there's way bigger things than $2,000. So we've done that a number of times now. COVID has changed a few things as it has for everyone, but so every other year we try to send out all of our juniors and seniors that are a part of River Valley. And we're trying to send them to places that maybe aren't on their radar, whether it's 1040 window, unreached, difficult, maybe sometimes perceived as dangerous or actually dangerous. But we say we want them to be aware of those challenges and begin to lean into that and not be afraid of it. So that maybe paints a little bit of the picture, but there's not too many weekends you won't hear it from center stage, the passion for those that are unreached, the nations of this world, our need as a follower of Christ to be involved in the Great Commission, even if that doesn't mean we're going to be one of the 500 or be on the front lines, but we all have a part to play. So.
Wow, that's powerful, Justin. Very inspirational. I want to draw a couple things out of what you've already said. And one is that you have made missions part of your identity as a church, and I would think part of everyone's identity as a disciple. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in churches today is missions as an addendum. It's stapled on to normal Christianity but in fact, it should be part of our very identity. So I think that's a key ingredient that you have there. Also want to circle back to your story and also the short-term mission trips you're offering to your students. I know that short-term mission trips get a bad rap from a lot of people. And granted, a lot of them have been done poorly. But when done properly, I think they can have incredible kingdom benefit. Your story is similar to mine. I went on a short-term mission trip, and at the end of those 30 days in West Africa, everything within me said, yes, this is what you were made for. And so I was a part of a group that helped me to understand a biblical, worldview. And it just changed how I viewed scripture, changed how I viewed my life. So I'm an advocate for those short-term trips when they're done as a part of a larger vision for the people you're blessing, but also for the people that are experiencing the short-term mission trip. Want to shift gears a little bit here. We're hoping to get more and more church missions leaders utilizing these resources. And I would imagine after your 15 years there, you've learned some lessons. So I want to ask you a question. If you could go back to the beginning of your pastorate as the missions pastor, what are a few lessons you might tell yourself at that point? Key lessons learned, 15 years later.
Yeah, no, I learned a lot. Some good, some things that I've definitely wished I could do a do-over on. But one of the first things I would say is you're not going to get it right. You're not going to do it perfect. I remember, reading the book When Helping Hurts, and I almost got paralyzed because I was afraid of doing something that was going to hurt. That wasn't the heart, that wasn't the intention, but just in my own inexperience, maybe zeal, passion. I was nervous, but I really just was like, I'm going to continue to be a learner. And even referencing the short-term trips, I absolutely agree that they have a powerful catalytic impact as part of the equation, not the end. So if that is just the beginning to open up hearts, open up eyes, and connect it to the bigger picture, if done well with a good host that understands the culture and the context and how to utilize short-term volunteers going, it can be powerful. But I think not to overanalyze, learn as much as you can learn, connect with people that have got more experience, rely heavily on the boots on the ground, long-term missionary or the organizations you're working on to give you insight. And we look for honest brokers, or what we call those that we can trust to give us an honest evaluation of ourselves, those that we're sending out short-term, long-term. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't let that stop you from trying, because we can get better and better and better. Just don't be afraid to try it. The other thing I would say, another lesson is learn the heart and the vision of your lead pastor. I understand, having talked to lots of missions pastors across the country, we're in a bit of a unique situation, but not trying to fight against who God has placed as the lead pastor of the church or the leadership structure, but understand their heart, understand their vision, and try to bring that to life. And it doesn't mean you can't stretch it, doesn't mean you can't challenge it in a respectful, honoring way to take it beyond. I know there's been times where I've even tried to cast vision to Pastor Rob and say, what if this, what if that? And he's kind of a yes guy when it comes to the Great Commission. So it's not hard to convince him. Typically he adds to it, but it doesn't mean that you can't add to the vision in an honoring way. But I do think you have to understand the context, the heart, the vision of your lead pastor, so you're not fighting against and trying to be something that church isn't. The other thing I would look at is, how do you scale it? Hopefully I can explain this, but our desire is that every single person in our church would be involved in the Great Commission. That doesn't mean everyone's going to be a long-term forever missionary. That doesn't even mean that everyone's going to go on a short-term trip. But I'll give you an example. I remember wrestling early on with the idea of trying to get people's eyes and hearts open to the Great Commission through the avenue of a short-term trip, for example. And we were having a hard time filling a couple teams. And read a book called Freakonomics that looks at the reverse side of things, the opposite side, that maybe we're looking at it wrong. And I started to think about that in regards to short-term trips. And I started to think all the factors that would have to align for somebody to go on a single trip. if you only offer 1 trip or 2 trips, all the factors, it has to be the right price, it has to be the right person leading, because not everyone likes everyone. And so you may not want to hang out for, 10 days with that leader or whatever. It's got to be the right type of ministry. Maybe somebody's not a preacher and it requires preaching, or somebody isn't a construction worker, but the trip is all about construction, or, there's all these different types. And so I just started thinking, what if we just offered like a dozen trips? I mean, that's going to take a lot of work and it takes some volunteers and some infrastructure. But what if we offered 12 different price points? What if we had 12 different leaders recruiting people? What if we had 12 different 12 different months that we were going to send trips? And lo and behold, like 11 of the 12 filled up like right now. And I was just like, wow, we just made a whole lot of options for a whole lot of people, and it just started to spiral. So then we doubled it and we said, okay, what if we did 2 trips a month? And sure enough, 90% of the trips filled up like right now. And then right before COVID, we were sending out a team every single week somewhere around the world. And so just looking at things, maybe, because I could have stopped at 1 or 2 trips and be like, well, people aren't interested. No, we actually were making it difficult because of all the factors that had a line for one person to go on that 1 trip. And so we do, one of our core life groups now is a missiology course. We use the Explore curriculum. Mobilization.org produces, Center for Mobilization does some great curriculum that we use just as a baseline missiological course for one of our life groups. So learning how to scale it to the whole church, not just a small group of people that are passionate about global missions, but no, this is our mission as a follower of Christ. Jesus' last command to his disciples, go into the world, preach this gospel. So what part am I going to play in accomplishing that great commission? So those would just be a few lessons maybe.
Yeah, I think, that what I've seen in a lot of churches is there's a small committed missions core of, 10 to 20 people, and they go on all the mission trips. And I know one church calls them repeat offenders. And what they mean by that is they got just a few people that are crazy about missions, which is great, but they really want to seed it across the board. And so in that case, what they've done is they've asked, if you've gone on a trip this year, you can go next year, but the trip's got to be very different than the one you went on last year. So anyway, let's ask this question. Obviously you're relating to other mission pastors. You're seeing what's happening in the church in North America when it comes to the missions arena. What do you believe is the greatest challenge facing church mission leaders today? And of course, with that, what is the greatest opportunity? What's a challenge and what do you see as an opportunity?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess I would say lack of awareness and education. I just think that there's the Barna research that came out a couple of years ago. There's other research that's available. Just how few people are actually aware of the incredible amount of unreached individuals and people groups that still exist. And that actually makes me optimistic, because if we were to raise the level of awareness and educate the church in a better way through resources like this or so many other great resources out there, imagine if it wasn't just a small group of passionate repeat offenders, if you will, but the church as a whole saying, this is unacceptable that 42% of the world is still waiting to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. Man, if we could engage the church, I'm optimistic about that. But I do think awareness and education is a big, big challenge. People just assume, as I talk to other missions leaders and even lead pastors, that they just assume everyone's had a chance to hear the gospel. They assume everyone's been reached and they've just not accepted, they've rejected it. But that's not the case when you actually look at it. There's still an incredible amount. So that to me is a big, big challenge, is how do we get this on the radar? More importantly, how do we get this into the heart of the leaders, the gatekeepers of our churches and into the church body? But I will say this, I was really encouraged early on in the pandemic. I reached out to one of our partners who the organization is a 100+ year organization. And I just began to think, there is historical data on global crisis. this isn't the first time we've faced a global crisis. I'm curious what has happened historically to global missions. And so I reached out to this organization, 100-year organization, said, what happened during the Great Depression to global missions from your guys' vantage point? And so they sent me the data on mobilizing missionaries and the data on giving. And so I looked at what happened during the 5-year period of the Great Depression, and giving went up just incrementally. And the mobilization of missionaries went down about 10%. I think it was 9% went down. And but then I looked at the decade that followed the Great Depression, and both giving and mobilization skyrocketed. I mean, mobilization went up like 80, 90% just with this one large organization, and giving went up nearly 200%. And I began to like talk to a few people about it and think about it. And I think this is what happened. This is my evaluation, is that a lot of people had their hopes and plans banked on like a no-lose investment or what they thought was just an up and to the right career. And those plans got demolished. Those investments got demolished. And a lot of people just turned to the Lord and said, Lord, what's your plan for my life? What can I invest in that is promised that it's not going to lose a return? Mm-hmm. And we know, Jesus said, if you give a cup of cold water in my name, it will not lose its return. And so I think a lot of people just started doubling down and saying, Lord, we're going to give where we know it's not going to lose its return, and we'll give our lives. And so I think the same is going to happen as we exit this pandemic, hopefully sooner than later. We know it's going to happen. Every tribe, every tongue, every nation is going to gather around the throne. So at some point it's going to start to happen at a greater scale. And I hope it's now sooner than later. But I'm optimistic, but I do think we have to raise the level of awareness somehow.
Justin, I just spoke at a church in Edmonds, Washington, just a couple of weeks ago. And I talked about how the worst of times are the best of times for missions. You talked about what happened after the Great Depression. And one of the things I hit on was during troubling and turbulent times, we're wakened to the brevity of life and the superficiality of material things. And so hopefully believers are leaning into something bigger than themselves and larger than their own interests. So I share that optimism. I know Ted does as well. We've had many conversations about this. In fact, if you look at the great century of missions, 1792, and 100 years following, it was an incredible growth of Christianity globally. The gospel went out in force. Talk about biosecurity issues and, travel complications. I mean, it's unbelievable. So I'm praying the same thing. I'm optimistic. I know Ted shares that as well. So thank you for sharing that. One more question here. You have a unique situation. You've described your church, and it's pretty special. I think we can say that. I meet with a lot of beleaguered church missions leaders out there, and I know Ted interacts with them as well. They don't have the buy-in from the pastor that you do, and you've already addressed that. Be humble, contextualize, empathize, listen to him. Understand those things. I think that's a great word. But they're beleaguered. They're not experiencing the buy-in. It's relegated to a missions-minded few in the church, and yet they're tasked with this job that we know has been given by Jesus Christ. And the church believes in missions. That's why they have a missions leader or missions team, but they're pretty weary. Can you say something to those folks? I know there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah, I agree. There are people that it just burns in their heart, and they want it to burn in other people's heart as well. And it can be discouraging. I think for me, the two things that just help keep the fuel in my heart and in my mind is missions biographies. Every great missionary faced incredible challenges, almost impossible situations, but God is faithful. And they continue to plant the seed. They continue to do what God has called them to do. And in his timing and in his way, he produces the fruit. And then just reading the parables. I was just reading in Mark 4 this morning. Actually, a missionary pointed this out to me a couple days ago. But in Mark 4, it's talking about the parable of the one who's planting the seeds. And in it, it says the farmer plants a seed, goes to bed, so rests, goes to bed, and wakes up, and the seed had grown, and the farmer knew not how it grew. And I had never noticed that before. I'm sure I've read it multiple times, but I never looked at the idea of just rest. like, be still and know that I'm God and my name will be glorified among all nations. Is, we read the first part, be still and know that I'm God, but we don't really, because that looks good on a coffee cup or on a board or something. But the second part of that verse in Psalms is talking about that his name will be glorified among all nations. And I just think, don't minimize the planting of seeds. You may not get to see the success, or may not get to see the birth of a great movement, but God promises us that when we plant the seeds, his word goes forth, it accomplishes the purpose and plan that he has, maybe not necessarily what we think it should be, but what his plans are. And so I just say, keep planting the seeds, whether it's in the leadership, whether it's in the people that God opens up doors for you to have conversation, but know that it is going to make a difference, and that those seeds will not be snatched away, but it accomplishes the purpose and plans that God has. But read the biographies, read scripture, be encouraged by the parables, and stay faithful. Don't grow weary in doing good, for in due season there will be a harvest. So
it's a good word, Justin. Hey, Ted, any more questions for Justin?
Just, let me just say real briefly that you're only getting a slice of what Justin is involved in. And if you are a major donor, or if you know of a major donor that wants to give to the Global Great Commission, Justin and a group of activists have put together an event that really puts giving out there as a priority in the completion of the task of the Great Commission. And if you want more information on that, you can just send an email to me via the missionexus.org website, and I'll put you in touch with Justin. But it's a very unique giving opportunity. Hey, we're getting a little long here. I want to tell you about something I like, because I got an important one.
There you
Matthew,
go.
if that's all right.
Yep.
For the last couple years, I've been watching the development of this group called Modus Dei. And Modus Dei is Latin for movement of God. And what they're focused on is the missiology behind movements. Now, I know there's controversy about this whole area of movements. Some people say, this is heresy. Some people say this is how the world is going to hear about Christ. And there's all sorts of in between there. And I really think that this Modus Dei group is a helpful contributor, because they're really looking at the biblical as well as studying what's happening in this movement realm. And they have been working on a book, and the book is now out. It's called Modus Dei, the Movement of God to Disciple the Nations. And it's full of great material. I got a pre-release copy to look at. And but it is available. If you're interested in the book, you can go to missionbooks.org, look for Modus Dei, and you'll find it. It's the thing I like this podcast episode.
Great. Well, I guess that's a wrap. Justin, thank you very much. It was a great conversation.
yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Thanks a lot, Justin. And Lord bless listening out there. Get your church activated for mission. Such great opportunities. So see ya.
Before you go, would you visit our hosts' websites? There you will find a wealth of interesting and challenging information about the state of the Great Commission. They are 1615.org and missionexus.org. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss one. Mission Matters is presented through a partnership between 1615 Missions Coaching and Missio Nexus.